Hi, I'm Dan, a psychic medium, Reiki master, and massage therapist.
And I'm Z, a psychic medium, intuitive coach, and Reiki practitioner.
And welcome to Supernatural Scuttlebutt,
A podcast dedicated to spreading spiritual awareness
metaphysical insights.
and supernatural conversations between two healers.
So sit back
Relax.
and enjoy the show. Hey everyone, I'm Dan,
And I'm Z, and we're really glad that you're here today.
and welcome back to Supernatural Scuttlebutt.
I'm laughing because every time we say scuttlebutt,
The connotation of butt in there.
I know.
So what are we talking about today, Z?
I feel like we need to talk about clairs a little bit more. You and I talked about that, and we lightly brushed on them in one of our previous videos about empaths. But if we can go into depth about that today, I think that would be really cool. You and I talk about that a lot in our classes, and I know you do in your individual Reiki sessions that you do. So,
Yeah, I knew about the clairs, but I didn't really start thinking about how I process spiritual information until you and I met, and you kind of went over the basics in our group. And every time we'd have a circle, Z would kind of be like, well, how do you interpret information? Do you hear it? Do you see it? Do you feel it? Do you just kind of know it? And it took me, a couple minutes to actually like process that and be like, well, being the empath, you feel things usually first, but I do get messages from other types of sensations or spiritual senses, right? So I guess the first on the list, since we've talked about empaths so intensely the past two episodes, would be the clairsentience, the feeling, right?
yeah, clairsentience. And do you want to go into clairsentience a little bit? Again, everybody, clair simply means clear. So we're talking about clear feelings, like clear sensing.
Right, right. I think the budding psychic or medium or empath, whatever you want to call it, wherever your journey kind of takes you, is, I think for me, it was the starting point was the clairsentience, the feeling of energies or feeling of something else that was kind of, pressurizing or imposing. And it manifests as depression or anxiety from over feeling these feelings so much. And I think that's how I like kind of self-diagnosed in my teenage to adult years. I have anxiety, but really I've been feeling everybody else's energy so intensely. And we talked about that psychic sponge of absorbing so much energy that you can't really articulate what you're feeling because you're feeling everything around you so much, almost like this cosmic soup of energy, right? How would you describe it?
Absolutely. I mean, that's such a good analogy, a cosmic soup of all that energy. So clear sensing and clear feeling, you can, often I feel like people who have that ability reach out, they sort of reach out with their feelings and touch people without touching them. So it feels like if I were to reach out and touch you and I'm like, is he sad? Does he feel angry? Does he feel happy? Like, what is the feeling that I'm getting from this person? And empaths generally, I think, do that without even realizing they're doing it. So it's like radar. I think one time you talked about it being a radar where you walk in the room and you kind of swoop around the room and you get all those feelings coming at you and you know who they're coming from.
Right, right. I think also with the clairsentience, like you said, you feel emotions, right? You feel other people's emotions so intunely or intensely. And I think we brought this up in one of the other episodes where, say, you grew up with a very angry household, and then as an adult, you kind of feel your boss's angry mood in the office or wherever you're working. It kind of brings back those old feelings of childhood where you're kind of like clamming up or shutting down a little bit because you're fearful of the anger, you're fearful of the repercussions of that
Mhm.
energy, right?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think we all do it. Often we don't know why.
Hmm.
So we started out our videos about being empaths because that's your vehicle. If you're an empath, you're a vehicle. If you're an empath, then that's your vehicle. That's what you're driving through the world in, that empathy. And then that empathy has lots of bells and whistles and switches and buttons And so we're asking, how are you getting the information first? How is that coming back to you in the form of intuition?
Mhm.
So I think can you give everybody an example of clairsentience and
Walking into, hmm, how about going into like a stadium full of people excited for a concert, right? Or a comedy show, right?
oh,
Like
wow, yeah.
they always say, like comedians, like if you watch it at home, it's not the same if you're in the theater, because when you're in the theater, it's almost like you're all sharing this consciousness of this playful, joyful energy where you all want to laugh, and it's easier to laugh with other people around you. It gets contagious. But when you're at home, things are still funny, but that you might not laugh as hard because it's like you're not getting the permission from the crowd to laugh at things. So
Mhm.
things that the crowd might be laughing at while you're sitting on your couch watching Netflix, you might just be like, huh, or have like a quick chuckle, right?
That's such a good analogy. That's so good. That is such a good analogy because, the same thing. Have you ever been in a crowd where people are getting really angry and upset, and it just seems to be rolling through the crowd, and that anger is attaching to everybody, and then they begin to feel it, and it just gathers momentum. So that would
Right.
be very similar to what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. On the other side of the spectrum, you have like what we've seen, the civil unrest the last couple of years. When
Mhm.
people are protesting together, they share in that rage and that hatred and that oppressive energy. Where if somebody was at home, they might just be angry and internalize it. But when they're in a crowd, they're more likely to attack or get violent or throw a brick, just because you get caught up in the mob mentality, the fervor of the energy that everybody's feeling. And we kind of see that, when people get into large groups and there starts to be anger, and then say there's the riot control or the police coming in, tear gassing, it only intensifies that anger, and it's like two opposing forces clashing together. It's that same type of energy. You can get wrapped up in it very easily. And then I've heard like a lot of people after the fact, they'll kind of be like, I didn't even realize what I was doing. I was in the heat of the moment. It was very passionate. And now I'm in prison for 20 years because I did something stupid while I was around, people that were supporting my decisions and making irrational behavior, right?
Yes, yes. And I think this can also extend outward to include events that have happened in places that maybe events you're not aware of. But I use a good example of where there's been a massacre or something like that that happened 100 years ago. That event creates such a strong emotion and so much energy associated with it that as an empath, when you walk through it, you feel it and
Hmm.
you're not sure where it's coming from, but it's coming from some place that you can't see. And so that very much relates to the psychiatric hospital that you grew up around.
Or even when you were living in Pennsylvania, weren't you by Civil War, like Gettysburg?
Yes,
And
yes.
you hear that from a lot of people, whether they're walking in Gettysburg or Auschwitz, even people that aren't necessarily super in tune with their gifts as an empath, they have a natural human ability to feel that. And
Mhm.
anyone that tells you they walked around Auschwitz or they walked in Gettysburg, it's like they felt the heaviness, they felt the sorrow, and it just was like it was something they wanted to experience, but at the same time, it's such an emotional toll because that energy is still there. It's still pervading the land, and you're kind of walking and absorbing it. And it's almost like enlightening as much as it is painful to kind of be in it.
Yes, yes. And I think this is sometimes where people get confused with hauntings versus just energetic work and energetic things that they're feeling. Because just because you're feeling that sadness or that anger doesn't mean that that's really someone, it's something, and it's associated with the land. And we've talked about that a lot. So,
Yeah. What do they always say? You're a product of your environment, right? Same type of thing. Doesn't necessarily need to be the energy of the actual place or house or land. It could just be you surrounding yourself with people that are not of the same vibration. You can't grow you can't grow seeds in bad soil. That's the way I look at it. It's hard to kind of grow when you're surrounded by people that don't acknowledge you. So that could be part of it too. It's like you feel that everybody else won't welcome and accept you as you are. So you kind of hide that part of yourself just to fit in. That's always a big common empath thing as well, as we've seen, as you've experienced, as I've experienced, as many other people have experienced, you know?
Yeah, and so imagine that you're driving your little empath car through the world. I like to think of mine as a convertible and it goes really fast. But you're driving that car through the world.
She's going through a midlife crisis.
Woo! And you're driving through all of these places that are dark and light and happy and sad. And if you don't put the top up and the windows up, then you're exposed to all of that. Whatever is happening in that environment is just coming down on top of you like rain.
Well, that's a good point to bring up too, really quick. Part of the clairsentience and the feeling is spiritual hygiene and keeping your energy
Oh, I
intact,
like that.
right?
Yeah.
Like I tell people that too, because when you're not getting good sleep, when you're not eating right, when your thoughts are draining, when life situations are draining, the way I look at it is like you have a bubble around you, you have your field, and the less healthy you are, let's say, there's more cracks in that field. So it's easier for that energy to seep in and kind of infiltrate you. And that empath feeling of like,
Yeah.
you're absorbing other people's stuff and you're not recognizing as such, and you think it's yours, and then you think there's something wrong with you. So there's a lot that goes in with the human just being able to feel through things.
Yeah, I agree. And I know when I've done readings, and I know you're gonna say the same thing probably, but like we'll have a reading scheduled and it'll be like scheduled for a Wednesday. And Monday comes around and I begin to feel some type of way. And Tuesday, I'm definitely feeling it. And I'm not very good at saying this isn't my stuff. But when Wednesday comes around and I do the reading, then it belongs to that person. And so
Yes.
it's the universe letting me tune into that through clairsentience and tune into their feelings and what they're going through so that we can have a more thorough and better reading. So I'm sure that's happened to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I noticed that, like, if I have a reading booked 2 days, 3 days out, and then it comes like 48 hours to 24 hours before that reading, I'll start to feel like almost like this internal resistance myself. Like I'm not feeling very good. I'm like, maybe I get this doubt almost like maybe I should cancel and reschedule. But after I kind of push myself to go through it and I kind of help people alleviate that heaviness, I know that it wasn't my energy and I feel better afterwards, right? So it's like
Yes.
you're making that pre-linking energy connection with your client or whoever you're going to work with, and you start to feel what they're feeling. So you kind of internalize that and think, maybe I'm not my best self, and maybe you're feeling a little doubtful if you could help them. But then once you kind of get the ball rolling and you start clarifying what they're feeling and go through, and you can kind of commiserate and make that energetic connection, that's when you start to realize you're on the right path and you keep going and it gets exciting again, right? You get the
Yeah.
momentum and the ball moving.
Yep, that's a really good point. And what I'll do is once I start talking to somebody, and you and I have worked together and done readings together. And Christina, my partner Bridges the Spirit, along with you, my partner Bridges the Spirit, she's really good at saying, okay, does this belong to you or somebody else? But I'm not good at that. And so if you're a new empath and you've just newly discovered that you are an empath, you're 100% going to think that everything coming in is just yours.
Right, right. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. You brought up a new empath. It's almost like the way I kind of really articulate like the spiritual journey, like when you're first going through it, it's very much similar to like being a baby, starting over
Oh, I
again
like that.
as an adult, because like babies are very sensitive, they're super stimulated, their eyes aren't developed, they can't see clearly, they can't think clearly. It's almost like you didn't develop your spiritual senses as an adult. You're still going through like the adolescent energy of being an energy worker, and that takes time and patience, because like every little kid, they want to grow up to be an adult so quick, and then once you're an adult, you're like, I wish I was a kid again. So I think it's the same thing with the spiritual journey. Like everybody sees that mountain, they just want to be on top of it, but they don't want to actually have to do the work to walk one step
Oh, that's such
at
a
a,
good point.
at a time to kind of climb up and get to that precipice and feel empowered and to know yourself so well to be able to articulate what's yours and what's not.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, when you're wide open like that, because before reading, we generally sort of, I don't want to say let down our guard, but we sort of open some of those doors that we don't normally leave open so that information can come through. And
Hmm.
so that's what's happening. We're just letting information come through that we wouldn't normally let come through under normal circumstances. Because since I've started working as a psychic medium, and I'm sure you're going to say this too, I'm very cautious about putting up my boundaries. Nobody's coming in here, that shouldn't be here.
Hmm.
How about you? How do you do that?
What, put up boundaries?
Mhm.
I think I always use this saying, it's kind of corny and cliche. I say that about a lot of stuff I say, but I think knowing is half the battle, especially when it comes to energy work. It's almost like once you identify your folly or where you made mistakes, you have to recognize that you can't keep repeating the same patterns, because that's kind of the
Mhm.
definition of insanity. And you're like, okay, this happened. It made me feel this way. I can't let this happen again. And once you kind of like make that decision mentally, spirit wants you to follow that up with physical action in the physical world to show to them you mean what you
Wow.
feel
Mhm.
and what you say. And then it kind of just becomes natural to hold those boundaries after a while. A lot of empaths are like, well, I can't do that. She's my mom, or they're my boss, or they're this. And it's hard to reestablish new boundaries with people. But I think it's like one of those things you have to kind of like really be open with your communication to set those boundaries with yourself and the other person. And also just limiting your interactions. You don't have to explain everything to everybody. I think that's like a empath trauma response. It's like, to validate yourself, you have to over explain everything and why you feel a certain way and why you want the relationship to change. You kind of get lost in the sauce. You can keep it simple. Just be like, that's kind of a boundary for me. I don't feel comfortable doing that. That's it. That's it. And stick to it. Right.
Mhm. Right. And I know we're going a little far out there for some people who have just tuned in and they're just beginning to recognize some of these gifts for themselves. But the same thing goes for where you're living. And I think what you're saying is setting your intention. And
Hmm.
so when I say a prayer and when I set my intention that this house is going to be protected and safe, that's my intention. And it's drawing that invisible protection around my house and property. The same goes for if you're living in a house where you're having all kinds of weird stuff happening and you feel like this house is, I'm going to use the word haunted, you feel like somebody else is there with you. You can do the same thing. You can say, I don't want you in this house.
Hmm.
You should not be in this space.
Hmm.
So one of the things that you and I talk about in our classes is, just be cautious of that. Just draw that boundary, close those doors, because it's so funny. Very often we hear people who come to us say, I don't want to do that because I'm enjoying all these people from the other side just popping in. But you don't have any control over that.
Right. Well, I'm going to use what you always say. It's like, well, if you let your house be open that much, it's going to be like Grand Central Station, right? There's just going to be things coming and going, good and bad, or whatever. You don't know what you're letting in your house. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And we've talked about clairsentience. We'd like to know your experiences, guys. So if you have some kind of experience you'd like to share with us involved in the clear feelings, please post your comments and your experiences below. We would love to hear about it and any questions that anybody would have.
Yes, we love feedback. We love answering questions. We're here to help. That's why we started this. So let's open discourse, right?
Yes, absolutely. This is kind of like one of our classes in a much more relaxed environment where everybody can hear my dog, chewing on a squeaky.
And we
Stuart.
should and we should all be lucky because not everybody gets to see Z's turtles.
And Dan's space that he's been working on for 2 years.
So moving down the list, what do we got next?
Let's see, we have clear cognizance, and we talked about that a little bit in our previous videos, but we're going to go into more detail about it now, I know. So take it away, Dan.
Thanks, Z. Um, so claircognizance is the knowing, also known as the inner knowing. It's like, you don't know how you know, but you just know it, right? And I kind of mentioned this the other podcast the other day in the other episode. What's the best way to kind of say that? The mother's intuition, right? I
Right.
know my kid's in danger. I know something's wrong. I know they've been in a bad accident. I know that I need help, that they're in a fearful state. There's just some things you can't explain that right? Like that
Mhm.
happens a lot with me. And it's hard to give evidence to people when you're like, I can't tell you, I can't give you proof. I just know it at a core level. Does that happen to you a lot with certain things?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about one time when Eric and I had a situation where we were supposed to go out to dinner with somebody. And when that person came in, I cannot begin to talk about how evil this felt. It just felt like this person was capable of anything and
Mhm.
had no boundaries and would do anything, period. So he and I were very uncomfortable. And it wasn't us feeling it, because Eric processes more information, just knowing it and being logical, but it
Mhm.
was knowing it. We both knew it. This person was involved in some suspicious activity and some other people's deaths. And we just at the core of our being knew, okay, this person is responsible for all of that. And it's a really, I'm so glad I had him to verify that and to back it up because, you know, if you have that, it makes it easier for you as an empath that you have somebody else who's feeling or knowing the same thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I was thinking of a quick example as well. I had this friend, he was like my best friend back in New York, and he'd always ask my advice for things, and I'd always be like, I don't know if you should do this. I don't know if you should date this girl. And he'd always have to ask my advice, and I'd always give my opinion, and he'd always do the opposite, and I'd always be right. And then I'd always be like, remember when I told you? And he'd be like, well, yeah, but so that always like is frustrating too when you know better and you try to tell people, but like
Yes.
you can't, change their decisions or their actions. They're responsible for themselves. But when you just have a feeling and you're just like, I don't know about that. I don't know if you should.
Right.
But they do
Right.
everything they can to convince themselves because they want what they want when they want it.
Yep, yep. Where we run into, I think where we run into problems as empaths is when we disregard that information. And it's challenging not to, especially if you're a brand new empath because you feel like you're crazy. But validating that information for yourself if no one else is around and saying, yeah, I don't feel good about meeting this person. I'm gonna cancel.
Hmm.
I'm gonna back off from this. Because
Right.
I'm sure in history there are people who said, I'm not getting in Ted Bundy's car.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I think a lot of people run into problems these days meeting other people over the internet. That's always been a big concern
Mhm.
since the beginning. But there's been stories of people like, yeah, I just felt like something wasn't right, so I didn't meet up with them. But then the next person that might have been like a little bit desperate for attention or meeting that person did go and they paid not a price for it, but they just regretted doing it.
Mhm.
I think that's kind of the stuff that you have to kind of learn that intuitional compass to guide you with. And a lot of people struggle with that because as empaths, we want to people please, but at the same time, we feel this feeling. So like the strength of the people pleasing overpowers our own feelings just because we want to make the other person happy. I feel like that's
Yeah,
a big pitfall we all seem to fall into as well.
yeah, I agree. And so we've talked about clairsentience and claircognizance, and those are generally when people come to our classes, the two clear things that they're experiencing as empaths. So in that car, those are the buttons that the people know, and that's probably the gas and the brake, how they're moving forward in the world with that feeling and that knowing. But if you have that, then you can expand on that and start paying attention to what other clairs you're using. So I think the next clair that we talked about is clairvoyance.
Hmm. Strong visual imagery. Clairvoyance is interesting for me because it's something that I've worked on in the past, but it's starting to develop in three different types of ways, I want to say. Dreams, more vivid dreams, more like colors, things seeming real when you're dreaming. Also, when you're awake, if you're meditating with your eyes closed, seeing imagery, seeing places, seeing
Mhm.
people. And then also there's this like type of clairvoyance that's more subtle, I've noticed, where I'll be walking and doing stuff and just kind of busy in my day to day. And I'll just get like a flash, and or I'll see an image, or I'll see something quickly. And you're like, whoa, what was that? It's very quick. It's like lightning quick sometimes, but sometimes it's like a more drawn out picture, right? It's really interesting when Z does her meditations during group, because that really helps our visualization process. When we all kind of blend our energy together, it amplifies what we all feel, hear, see, taste, and touch on the other side. So it's interesting to me that lately we've all been kind of seeing the same things at the same time, getting like certain numbers at the same time. So the clairvoyance is really, it's really interesting how it develops, because you think it's your imagination as an adult, you don't necessarily want to trust it, but once you kind of like lean into it a little more and you do trust it, it gets stronger and you can trust it.
Yeah. Wow, that's such really a good point, because people don't trust it. Because
Right,
you think I'm making this up in my mind.
right, exactly.
So yeah, I see it in my mind, and I don't like a movie. It's like a movie,
Yes.
and that's how it comes through. So if I'm sitting and meditating and I'm gonna do a reading for somebody, I'll see that. But then it can be more directed. You could actually create a room that you are sitting in, and you say to your guides or whoever it is that you're talking to, I'd like this person to come in for this person, or who wants to come in for this person? And then I'll see those people on the other side begin to come in.
Hmm.
And it is very easy, as you said, to dismiss it, because I've also been standing in the kitchen and looked and said to myself, wow, that was a guy walking by in really old-fashioned clothes, but who was that? And then I'm like, no, he that was that clairvoyance, because I'm seeing it.
Hmm.
And so I'm curious, have you ever had a similar experience?
It's funny you mention that, because lately, out of the corner of my eye, I've been feeling like I've been seeing someone standing like right there, and I'll like have to do a double look, and they're not there. But like I could have sworn I saw like an image of a person standing there. I'm kind of a night owl, so when I'm up late at night, I'm watching TV or YouTube or Netflix or whatever, I'll notice shadows moving around, and that usually
Oh,
scare that usually scares a lot of people. It used to scare me back when it used to happen, where I try to just block it out. I didn't see anything. I didn't see anything. I didn't see anything. But now I've come to know it's like, it's just like anything else. We're in the soup of energy. There's things always constantly moving in and out. So it doesn't really threaten me, because I'm not letting it. Once again, going back to that boundaries and what you're allowing in your space, what you're allowing to happen in your home.
yeah.
So it doesn't really disturb me as much, because I feel it's more benevolent, if that makes sense. I don't really feel any
Yes. Yes.
maliciousness or tricky trickster type of energy or demonic energy or anything like that. But I mean, from us watching movies and TV and Hollywood, that's the first place that our mind goes.
Right. And that is one of the common things. So I grew up in a fundamental church, and everything was bad. We couldn't put on makeup, we couldn't wear pants, we couldn't cut our hair. Everything was bad. And so everything was evil. So a lot of people have grown up that way. And I feel like they need to sort of kind of get away from that train of thought, because here's an example. I went into my closet a couple weeks ago, and I saw a shape in the closet, and it was dark, and it like made me step back, like a shadow figure, like you're talking about.
Hmm.
But ultimately it ended up being one of my best friend's siblings who had crossed over. And her siblings had come to me before, and her family had. So it was just that sibling reaching out. And that went from the closet. And then I saw her again in the shower. So I feel like she was trying to be respectful, but the energy that she had was not fully developed yet. And she was in that process of crossing over and having just crossed over, just a shadow.
Hmm.
And I saw the same thing when my dad died. He had died in the living room. We went outside. I was sitting with my mom, and I saw a shadow figure, and I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt it was him.
Hmm.
So just because we're seeing something that looks dark or something that we can't explain doesn't mean that it's evil or threatening, like you've said.
Hmm.
I think if we try to not respond that way, and we kind of back off from it and try to analyze it like you're saying, I think it makes a big difference.
I think a good way, like, I like how you said all that, because it's like, we only get the meaning from it if we attach something to it. So if we assume all shadow figures or all things out of your corner of your eye are evil, you know what I mean? We're
Right.
perpetuating this fear to kind of like become a magnet to attract that type of energy in, right? If we don't kind of give that attachment to it and we kind of just observe without absorbing and just observe that energy and kind of just like let it be
Mhm.
where it is, you're probably going to notice you're not feeling like that maliciousness or that darkness that you would think is associated with it.
Right, right, exactly. I agree with you 150,000%. So that's a big step that people have to take if they are psychics or mediums, are very intuitive, and if they're empaths and they decide that they're going to go down this path of developing their gifts, is just backing away from that mentality.
Right, right.
And because it's really helped me to watch, as I said, like ghost hunters. The other day I talked about them. They're so scientific and they run towards something, not away from something. But more often than not, probably 97%, it's something that is very explainable and has to do with the environment that they're in.
Yeah, it's just like misunderstood energy.
Yeah. Although, I've told you I'm the first person who doesn't like anybody being in my house and appearing in front of me. So I'm the first person who's yelling, Jesus Almighty, if I see something.
Say Michael the Archangel, say Michael the Archangel,
Yeah.
protect me.
Good Lord.
Oh man. So I gotta say too, Z has a very vivid clairvoyant ability. Like the things she's able to pull up, the things she's able to see, it's like almost like instant. Like she doesn't have to think about it. It's just there. She's in the image. She's pulling it out. So that's always like, I always admire your ability to see that like things so clearly and so fast. It's funny
That's
because
so funny
we
you say that because I think the same thing about you, but I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I feel the same way about you, that you're the same way.
it's always funny because like we joke when Z kind of like comes in the door for the first circle, it's almost like she just like exited a portal and she's just like and she walks in the room and I'm like, and sometimes she'll like look through me. I'm like, what is she looking at right now? What is she seeing? And she's not telling me because she'll like zone out and like look in the corner of her eye. I'm like, what are you staring at? She's like, oh, sorry, I was talking to my guides, or I was getting a vision or something.
Hey, your grandfather who hung around for quite some time, so adamant. What was he so adamant about? Let's see, what was it that he wanted us to
Wasn't it
know?
the flag? Didn't he keep
The
showing you the
flag,
American
the
flag?
flag.
And that he was like a patriot and he was very,
Yeah, he was all about that.
yeah. My grandfather was a vet from World War II. He was in the Navy. He was only in for like 6 or 7 months because they were blowing the cannons and he had ear damage from the cannons going off. So he didn't get to go to war. He didn't see any combat. He didn't really go overseas, but like he's very prideful and proud of his American, you know, patriotism and being a part of the military. Even though it wasn't for long, he was proud to kind of be a part of, the World War II generation. Even though he couldn't go and,
Mhm.
become the hero or war hero, whatever you want to say, like he was very happy that he got to volunteer and sign up and, at least attempt to be a part of it.
And he wants you to have that flag. I know you don't have it now, but eventually maybe you will.
My uncle has it. My mom's not talking to my uncle, so I'm not getting that flag for a while. I'll eventually take it though. I have his old military helmet. He used to walk in like the parades for like Memorial Day or 4th of July or Veterans Day. And he would kind of be I don't know what to call it, but he would like be leading like the group of soldiers
Oh,
behind him. So he was very happy. The whole family would come out. Everybody would like watch and cheer him on. So he was very like very prideful with that, very
oh,
happy to like
that's so
show them.
cool.
Yeah.
That is so cool.
So on the list, we're going further. Clairaudient hearing, right? So
Yeah.
what would you identify with the clairaudient? Obviously, it's hearing, but what messages do you get through hearing? How do you hear? Like, I guess
That's a
explain
good
that a little bit.
question. people, and I want to tell people, people are going to see things and hear things all different kinds of ways. So we, again, in the comments, please put your experiences into the comments or your questions, because we would really like that. We hear all different kinds of things. And so clairaudience has impacted me my entire life. It has been, I could always hear people walking around, even when I was a little child. I felt them in the room, but I could hear them and hear them moving things, shuffling around. I told you an experience I had at a hospital for Indigenous people that I worked at late at night, and I could hear them. It was as though the room was full of people. So it can also be, and I'd like your opinion about this too, if you don't mind. Songs, because songs will come on and you can hear those words and you know that there's a connection. And so that's been a big deal for me because my dad was a musician. So what about you? How have you experienced this, Claire?
I wanted you to bring that up first, but I was going to bring up the songs because that's the biggest thing for me. I've always had, my dad was born in 1950. He had a wide range of musical tastes. So we'd be listening to doo-wop, Motown, we'd be listening to the 60s classic rock, the Beatles, then anything from like ABBA and disco, 80s pop hits to night, like we would listen to everything. So I wasn't discriminatory in the music we were listening to. I had no choice as a kid too. But when I hear a song that kind of emotionally resonates with a memory, or certain lyrics keep on repeat, like the same line over and over, it's almost like a broken record, and it just keeps playing this one part of a song over and over and over again. Sometimes people like, I got this song stuck in my head. My wife will call it earworming. If somebody's singing a song and then you start singing the song and you can't get it out of your head. But I think that's spirit's way of communicating, like over and over. And I'll use one of our past circle members, Yannicka, like after she had this falling out with a friend where it wasn't the best relationship, she kept hearing in her head over and over again, I don't want to do your dirty work no more.
Wow.
I don't want to do your over and over and over again. And it was like almost spirit's confirmation of saying, you did the right thing by ending this relationship.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
I think not only the music itself, but like the lyrics of the song that keep repeating, like, why do I keep thinking this one line over and over? It's like spirit's way of trying to connect to your rational mind to be like, we're giving you a message, dummy. Pay attention, pay attention.
Did you ever see that really, really old show called Medium? And Alison Dubois, she's a medium in Phoenix. It's a really cool show, but it's, gosh, I don't even know. It's probably in the 90s. I'd have to look.
Mhm.
But they did a very good depiction of that on this one show. There's just a song constantly running in the background, and she's trying to drown it out and she's trying to think over it. And that was such a good depiction, because that is the way it is. Because when you're getting that message through clairaudience with a song, it's like you can't get away from it.
And also
And
besides the songs, you'll get like random things pop in your head. Like I'll be thinking to myself, and then I'll just be like, I'm gonna make a left, and my head's like, no, don't. Like I'll just get like a quick, like your guides kind of give like a gentle nudge or suggestion, like maybe you should go make a right instead of a left. And that's kind of a subtle way of like trying to hear and pay attention to it. And then if you don't listen to it and you make a left, you're stuck in traffic, you nearly get into an accident, you can't, you get a flat tire. Like it's spirits trying to like protect you from yourself.
yeah.
Almost in a sense.
Yes. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was going to too, because it has happened to me a number of times that I've been at a light and the light turned green, and like I heard a voice clearly say, stop. And so I'm like, okay. And then I remember one time just a big cement truck barreling through the red light, and I would have been in that intersection. So it made such a big impression on me that I always pay attention to that if I hear it.
Mm-hmm.
So I like how you describe that, because it's going to come out of nowhere. You have to really believe it. You have to trust in it, and just listen to whatever is being said to you.
And you know how many times I've heard from myself or other people, and they're like, I should have listened to myself. I should have listened to myself and I should have known better, but I didn't. And I did that and I paid the price
Yeah.
for it. So I guess the cautionary tale is pay attention to those intuitional hits, pay attention to it.
Yeah, so what we have next on our list is Claire Gushians, and Claire Gushians is clear tasting.
Mhm.
So very often, well, okay, not very often, I have this happen to me, but I will have it happen to me, is somebody is big into some sort of food and it comes through. But I have heard other mediums who have the taste of blood in their mouth, or, indicating how someone had crossed over. Christina, that you and I work with, she has clairgussion. It's like crazy. Food is a
Wow.
big deal in their family,
Mhm.
and that's their language of love. And so she'll be like, I've got bread, I've got the taste of bread, I've got this really good sauce, I've got meatballs, and she'll just describe all of this food that somebody really enjoyed and loved. And they're coming through with that clear tasting that she's doing. So have you ever worked with this particular Claire, or?
I'll get random smells or tastes in my mouth when I'm just out and about, and you kind of like, whoa, that was weird. Where'd that come from? There's this old like hippie joke where like they say that like when they've taken like LSD or like mushrooms, they're like, did everything just taste purple all of a sudden? Because like it's I think there's the emotional the limbic system, which is in the brain, it's your emotional center. It's so strongly tied to smell and taste and memory. So when you get like a specific like smell, like say like pipe tobacco or cigar smoke, I immediately go back to when I was a kid. My grandfather would be smoking, right? And I'll know he's around because I'll get a whiff of cigar smoke and nobody's smoking a cigar near me. But it's like a very faint whiff. It's not like someone smoking a heavy cigar in a smoke filled room. It's like I get a whiff of it and I can't really see anywhere around me where somebody's smoking. Another one that I've experienced would be like lemon or lavender randomly, like something to that effect. I don't really know like the significance of those, but like I will get random. And I used to be a cook as well. I used to be a chef, so I'm very keen on
Mhm.
smell and taste. So even if I haven't eaten and I'll just get like a random scent or something, it'll kind of like bring you back to another emotion or memory. But I'm not really strong with it. It's only like a once in a while thing for me. I guess I'm not as strong as
Mhm.
Christina would be. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about you though?
And you're talking about Clear Alliance and Clear Gushions, so the Gushions for tasting and the Alliance for smelling.
Mhm.
And I like that you put those two together, because very often people will just say Clear Gushions and they'll mean tasting and smelling, and I totally get what they're saying.
Because you taste through your uh
Right. I
your
like how
nasal cavity, right?
Yeah. And then, so I think cigarette smoke is a big thing that we very often get in readings. Like, it will smell that smoke. And if that person was a heavy smoker,
Mhm.
one time I know we got the smell of a fire, and like a house fire. And that was something that,
There's one Sopranos episode where Tony is like on the golf course with like the mob boss of New York, and he's like an older Italian guy, obviously, but I think it's Carmine Senior. He just like is sitting there eating lunch, for their break from the 9 or 18 holes, whatever it was, and he's kind of like having a hard time breathing, and he just goes, "Does anyone else smell burnt hair?" And then he had like a stroke or a heart attack and died.
oh,
So I think there's something correlating with like a stroke or like a heart attack with like burnt hair smell. I don't know where that comes from. I've heard something to that effect,
or burnt
but
toast. I've heard burnt toast or something
burnt
burning.
burnt toast, yeah, that's really interesting though, that like that's what your senses pick up right
Yeah.
before like a major like health event, let's say. But I've gotten the burning wood or burning smoke or burning fire or
Mhm.
campfire or even like burnt plastic, like what it would smell like a house burning type of smell too, as well. So I understand that. What do you think? Now the question is like, what do you think the significance of something like that is, just for spirit on the other side to be like, I passed a house fire, or I like to go camping, or something
Or
to
it
that
was a
effect.
big event in their life, and it's a way to identify them, because very
Mm.
often, don't you think we very often get those kinds of clues to identify the person that we're talking to?
Like if they're a firefighter, or they were a ranger that
Right.
always camped out and had fire and loved to make fire and that type
Or
of
they
stuff.
cross in a fire, or, right, yeah, that sort
Or
of
they
thing.
were like a grill master and they loved the barbecue, so they always used like fresh wood, and they always smelled like that, and their clothes smelled like that, and the car smelled like that. So that's like a memory that people would take forward, really
A lot of
strongly.
people say roses or some sort of perfume, something that was associated with that person. I know several people who have been sick and they felt like somebody was taking care of them and was with them, and they could smell flowers, or they could smell
Mm.
perfume that, Aunt Betty
Mhm.
used to wear back in 1945 or something.
Yeah, you're right about that. I've actually heard other people talk about cologne or aftershave and be like, I haven't smelled that since my grandfather passed, right? Or a close family member or an uncle or whatever. He would use this specific aftershave his entire life, and I haven't smelled it since, but like every once in a while I'll get a whiff of it,
Yeah, and like you said, it instantly takes you back.
Mm-hmm.
When you smell it. So for us as mediums, if we're doing that and we're relaying it, that person can't smell it as much, but it still gives them that feeling that they know who that person is. But if it's there in
Mm-hmm.
the room with them, then definitely, I think it would take them right back to that event and that person.
It reminds me of Ratatouille. You've seen Ratatouille before? That movie?
No,
You
I'll
never
watch
saw it?
it weekend.
Well, spoiler alert. So the whole time, the rat Remy is kind of like controlling the human to cook. Like the rat can't cook, obviously, so he's using the human to kind of do all the actions to cook, and he's like pulling his
Oh,
hair like he's a giant like robot. And this restaurant starts to take off because the rat's doing all the cooking and everybody likes the recipes. And like the worst critic in town comes in, and they're always scared because you always give this restaurant a bad review. And at the end, the rat makes ratatouille, which is what the movie's called, which is like a French vegetable dish with like tomatoes, and it's very like hearty and kind of peasanty, but it's also like a comfort food. So he makes this dish for the critic, and as soon as the critic takes the first bite, he's very critical of everything. He immediately goes back to when he's 4 years old, and he's sitting at the table, and his mom or his grandma is giving him a big bowl of it, and
wow.
he's happy and he's contented, and he loved it. He loved the dish. So it's like it was a really good like artistic articulation of how that can immediately, like the taste, the smell immediately brings you back into the memory, and it's like you're back in there and you're like, whoa, I haven't experienced this, but my brain somehow locked it up in the recesses of mine, and now it's activated again.
Wow. Wow. I will watch that this weekend. I
You
like
could just
movie.
watch the clip. You don't have to watch the whole thing. I gave you the endings. So.
Thanks, Dan.
It's been out for like 20 years, Z.
For empaths that are watching this channel, just know you have that, you're in that car. You have all of this at your disposal, but you've probably just been using the brake pedal and the gas pedal.
Right, right. And
Say,
like Z was saying, we have all of these. One or two might be stronger than the other. Three might be stronger than the other, but they're not set in stone. They're all able to kind of be developed. I think the smell and taste, that's more subtle. I don't think that's such a major one, but when it comes in, it's really powerful. It's like a kind of like once in a while thing. But the feeling, the knowing, the seeing, the hearing, those all really like are like the four cornerstones of the clairs, I think, right? As the
yeah,
psychic
yeah,
medium,
yeah.
empath, tarot reader, whatever you want to call yourself, energy sensitive person. Those are kind of like the four cornerstones that kind of keep shape to all those extra sensory abilities that you have as a human.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so too.
So that's the clairs. Hopefully we went in plenty of detail and you feel a little bit better from watching this. Like Z said a few times in this video, like and comment, let us know how you experience or articulate this energy, which ones you feel, how you like to develop it, anything like that. We're open to criticism, feedback. We want to hear from you.
Yes, absolutely. And please subscribe if you like this content. We would love that. We have a lot more coming. We're going to talk about all kinds of kind of weird and interesting things. So I'm Z.
I'm Dan. Thanks for watching Supernatural Scuttlebutt.